Indeed. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I guess the first thing I want to do is just say thank you to our speaker this morning. Saulo Padilla is here and going to share with us about his work with MCC. And I am going to just turn things over to you. So take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to share with you this morning. My name is Saulo Padilla. I work for Mainland Central Committee US as Immigration Education Coordinator, and I've been on this role for the last 14 years. And I will share with you a little bit more about my story this morning. I live here in Goshen, Indiana. As you can see, we are with quite a bit of snow, so it looks like I'm in Canada, but I'm not. I come to you from Goshen, Indiana. And let me share my screen and share with you a little bit more about myself this way. Just to start here in this presentation, I have a picture here on the left side of the screen. I took this picture probably when I started with MCC 14 years ago. It's a picture of the fence or the border wall, or separation barrier, however you want to call it, between Mexico and the US. This was made with the landing strips from the war in Vietnam, where planes used to land in. That's how they had made it. Now the new fence or wall, this was taken down, and now is higher. And I'll show you some pictures of what it looks like then. But one of the things that caught my attention back then, and still, is these crosses that are in there. And I'll talk a little bit more about the crosses that are in there later. But the crosses represent, in the Mexico side, represent the people who have died trying to cross or jump the fence or go around it, or try to cross in there. And to me, it was always interesting to see this wall or this fence full of crosses. So until you get close to it and you see names in the crosses, and you just get a sense of what it is about that you're seeing. When I come to the topic of immigration, and what informs my work with MCC about immigration, one of the things that informs my position is my personal story. And what I have done here, some of us Mennonites, we like to quilt. So then I have quilted my story here so that you can walk with me in this. But I was born in Guatemala in 1970. And in Guatemala during that time was in the midst of a civil war, a civil conflict, that had started in the 1950s. And one of the reasons why it started was foreign intervention trying to turn Guatemala into a banana republic. And then the interest of the United States too into that, and some of the companies here, the United Fruit Company. You can Google all this. I'm not going to go through all this, but you can just Google United Fruit Company, Guatemala, CIA, and it will come out. But that started then a war in Guatemala, a conflict that lasted 36 years, 200,000 people died, and it ended in 1996. But I was born right in the midst of that. My father was a pastor, and he was also a student at a university in Guatemala that was very outspoken about social justice. For the first 8 years of my life, I remember life being very normal. I am the one on the right in this picture here. That is my brother, my cousin, my little brother. And for these first 8 years of my life, I remember life being normal. Going to church on Sundays and starting to go to school, family being together. But then in 1978, my father, with some of the students in the university, they started protesting against some of the politics in Guatemala. And then in October of 1978, my father was kidnapped by the government in Guatemala. He was tortured, and then for about a week he disappeared. And then he showed up at a hospital. I remember I was between 8 and 9 years old at that time, and I remember going to the hospital to see my father, and his eyes were bloodshot and broken bones in his face and his body. He came out from that to the house, and he was traumatized by the experience, and they continued to persecute him in Guatemala. The government trying to get him out. By 1980, the government, he was receiving so many death threats that he had to leave and cross the border into Mexico as a political refugee. So in May of 1980, then he had to cross the border. And then by August of that same year of 1980, then the rest of the family, 5 children and my mother, we crossed the border as political refugees with my father. And then we met with my father in Mexico. And this is a picture of my siblings and myself and my mother in the red dress in front of the Basilica of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And first time that I crossed the border, trying to reunite with my father as a political refugee. And we spent a few months there. My father applied for political refugee in Canada. And then at that point, he received it, but for just, all these other reasons that I'm not gonna go into detail, but this part of the family was returned to Guatemala, and my father went to Canada as a political refugee. And that then it separated the family again in January of 1981. He went then to Canada, rest of the family returns to Guatemala. And at this point, I am 10 years old, I'm in 4th grade, and this is a picture of me graduating from elementary, but it actually took me a while to get to graduate from elementary because I failed 4th grade when they pulled me out of school and they took me to Mexico. And then the year after that, when we returned, my mother returned with the 5 children to Mexico, to Guatemala. We could not live together because my mother had to work. And she sent the 3 older siblings to live with an uncle who had other 7 children. And then she stayed in Guatemala City with my 2 younger siblings. So I really wasn't being cared for that much during that time. So I failed 4th grade again. What I remember from that year of being at my uncle's place, my head got full of lice. My feet, I had this fungus that I could not walk, and I used to wet my bed every night. And that's kind of the memories that I have from that year, and that mom was far away in Guatemala City, and my dad was in Canada. Then we returned to Guatemala City the following year, and then back to live with mom, the 5 siblings. Life went by, and I wasn't doing well in school. But then by 1985, then we heard that the documents for us to go to Canada and reunite with my father were coming through. And by February of 1986, then we left Guatemala and we went to Canada. Nothing could prepare us for that change, right? February, like now, in Guatemala is probably one of the best times of the year to visit. It's in the 70s, beautiful weather. And then we moved, and I remember arriving in Toronto, and then through the airport, they put us in this room. They started dressing us up and putting snowsuits on us and boots and hats and gloves. And then when we woke out for the first time, I felt that freezing air in my cheeks, and life changed completely at that point. People will talk to us, and we didn't understand a thing they were saying. I had taken a few English lessons in Guatemala in school, but I could say, thank you, you're welcome, chicken, egg, pencil, and that was about it, right? So then we arrive, language changes, weather changes. It looked similar to what I see outside right now. And then the food, my mother was trying to find the flour for the tortillas in the stores, but at that point we didn't have the ethnic or the Hispanic aisle, at Safeway. So then my mother was there grinding the corn, trying to make flour for the tortillas. And yeah, everything had changed for us, and we were trying to figure out what to do. One of the things that also didn't happen is nobody really walked with us in how do we become family again, how to reunite the family. My mother and my father had been separated for almost 6 years. So then, and nobody walked through to that process of reunification of the family. Last time I saw my father, I was 10 years old. Now I'm turning 16. We all had changed. So then couple months passed, and then the honeymoon was over. And then my mother and my father decided to separate. So my mom went back to Guatemala with a very deep depression, and she took my sisters with her. My two brothers and I stayed with my dad in Canada, and then we kept going in life, but then suffering a lot, the separation, the immigration experience, my mother still suffering with depression in Guatemala, to the point at some point she said that she felt she was going crazy. She would walk out of the house sometimes and start looking the ways in the street to see how she could start walking to Canada to go get us, to go pick us up. And so it was, mental health became an issue for her at that point as well. And well, life continued. One of the things that happened during that time is that because we came from an evangelical church in Guatemala, my brother and I started looking for a church to attend. And a friend in school told us that that there was a church that it was seemed evangelical, but then they had a name, Mennonite, and we didn't know what Mennonite was at that point, and we didn't have a clue. But then we decided to go to church on a Sunday, and then we found out that all these people who were at church were speaking Spanish, just like us, different accents, but we all had Spanish as a common thing, and also everybody had immigration as a common experience. And one of the the beautiful things was having immigration or faith, and also Spanish, and we used to worship in Spanish all the time. But they were strangers themselves. They were immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers in this congregation, and they knew how to welcome strangers. They knew the suffering that one goes through when one moves from one place to the other. So then they embraced us, and one of the things that happened during that time too is because my father was traveling quite a bit for work, my mother was in Guatemala, so the three boys, we just used to go to church, but celebrations for every year, birthdays or Christmas, New Year's, were moments for us to cry. We just were crying, missing mom, missing all sorts of things. So then the church embraced us, and they took care of us, and the sisters in the church would invite us to eat at their places and have a warm meal. So a lot of times when people ask me, so what can I do about immigration or about immigrants? And I think one of the people think about big things, right? Going to Capitol Hill and advocating for that, and that's very important. But also what I received was the hospitality of brothers and sisters in the church that offer hospitality, very practical hospitality during this time. And I just, it warms my heart every time that I think about that time. The other thing that happened to this church is in the youth group, I met this beautiful young woman, and then we started dating, going out, and then a couple years later, we got married. Very young, we're turning 18, and then we just last week, it was 34 years of marriage, and we have been married. So then that was one thing. Our three daughters were born in this congregation as well, in Canada, in Calgary. And then this church also has been was a network for me. In that church, I was given the opportunity to be a church leader, as a worship leader, a youth leader, a men's groups leader, and then they started seeing all these sort of things. I didn't think about me as somebody smart, because I have failed all these years in school. But in this church, they started just to build me up and support me and do skill training in some ways. And I remember the first job that I had during, as I came to get married and into life. My first job was a janitor, then I was a forklift operator, then I was a painter, I was a truck driver for 7-Eleven, I was a sandwich maker, I was a cook for a year. And then by the time that I'm about 22 years old, I lost all these jobs. I didn't have a high school diploma. I was a high school dropout. And then a person in church said to me, I've heard that there is a training that they're offering for recent immigrants, and you should apply for this. It's an organization that is doing this. So then I went to apply for this training, and I received it, and it was in auto mechanics. So the name of the organization was Mennonite Central Committee, and that was my first time encountering Mennonite Central Committee through the receiving end as an immigrant, recent immigrant to Canada. I was training auto mechanics. Then I was placed in a shop to work for a while, and it was a Toyota shop. So then I got actually signed in as an apprentice in there. I went through 4 years of studies, the shop, and then I became a licensed mechanic for 5 years for Toyota, and then they put me into the Lexus division. And then by 2000, the year 2000, I became the Lexus Technician of the Year in Lexus. And so I put this in there to prove that, but also it's part of the church in some ways, building me up as a leader in the church, but also giving me opportunities in becoming a network. In 1998, 1999, in the church, somebody who had come to Goshen College, to the Hispanic Ministries program, said to me, you should go to Goshen to study. And I, like I said, I didn't have a high school diploma, but then they encouraged me to pursue that, and I was in some ways encouraged and pushed a little bit to get my GED. So I did get my GED, and I sent it into Goshen College to the Hispanic Ministries program. They accepted me. So then my wife and I had to make the decision of selling our home in Calgary, and then to come to Goshen, Indiana to study. But we did. We truly believed that God was leading us and was putting this in our hearts. So we sold our home, we grabbed our things. In the year 2001, in August, we decided to come to Goshen, Indiana to study at the Hispanic Ministries program. And then we moved in here. We put all our stuff in a U-Haul, moved a couple of blocks to our little house here, and went to school. And that was in 2001. I graduated from Goshen College in 2005. And then when I was finishing at Goshen College, then somebody in the church, in the Mennonite church that I had come here, they tapped me in the shoulder. They said, hey, you should go to seminary. And I said, no, it's too much, and I don't know if I'll be able to make it. And then they said, you should go. And so I applied, and they decided to give me an opportunity and a scholarship to go to seminary. I finished in 2008 at AMBS, the seminary here in Elkhart. And then as I am finishing in 2008 my master's degree, then somebody in church also tapped me in the shoulder, and they said, you should apply for this position with Mennonite Central Committee as Immigration Education Coordinator. And 14 years later, I am here telling you this story of this experience of welcome by the church, but also encouragement and opportunity for me to serve the church. But this is what happens when I think we care of each other and give welcome. Today, I have my family here. My wife is from El Salvador. I am from Guatemala. Our 3 daughters were born in Canada, in Calgary. And then we moved in here in 2001. And my 2 daughters, Sarah and Rebecca, are married, and they have 2 children each. So I am a grandfather of 4 boys who are born in Indiana. And I don't know where the family is going next, but this is what informs my position on immigration, this movement and this welcome that I have received in hospitality and encouragement by the church. One of the greatest jobs that I think I have at this point is for me to share this story with my grandchildren, to make sure that they know how we have experienced hospitality by the church and encouragement as well. So in the future, they don't forget about this, but also it is biblical, right? in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God continued to tell the people of Israel, do not forget you were slaves in the land of Egypt. And that was so that they would have compassion, but also be close to the heart of God for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And that was continuously part of the story, telling the story, so they don't forget. So then one of my jobs today is to do that, to offer this story continuously to my children and my grandchildren, and hopefully to my great-grandchildren if I get there, that they don't forget this story. So in the future, when they hear about immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, that they can offer also welcome and hospitality to them. So that informs my position on immigration in one way. The other one is that through this lens of migration and as an immigrant, as the son of a refugee, I am able to then read the Bible through a different lens, or through a lens that provides me then insights into the stories of these characters in the Bible. The narratives in the Bible, when you read them, you find that a lot of people in the Bible, or the characters, were immigrants or refugees, or seeking refuge or asylum. And I don't know if you have ever seen these characters, and we can go through many more as well, but I just pulled these ones here. Abraham crossing to different places to get where God was leading him in some ways. And even at some point we find Abraham trying to hide his identity. Today we talk about many immigrants and people crossing borders in different places in the world, trying to hide their identity or using a fake identity to cross there. Abraham, at some point, he's crossing to a kingdom, and then he actually tells Sarah, tell them you are my sister, right? And he didn't want to be seen as the husband, or so then because he felt certain danger in that, so then he wanted to hide his identity in some ways. Well, we know the story. What happens? The king has a dream, doesn't touch them. But then we find people migrating in the Bible and also trying to figure out how to do that, navigating systems, and even in the Bible. And we can go in there, different stories here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But one of the stories is the story of Joseph. That is a story that we tell children very often, but very seldom do we stop in the story where at the beginning there is a child being sold. It's a transaction. Human trafficking is happening right there. And does this story inform our position on human trafficking? There's a little boy, we don't know exactly how old, but have you ever seen a child being sold? And imagine what that child is going through at that point when he's being separated from the family. And then what life becomes, and we know the rest of the story, we know the happy ending, but then what happens through all that time between they don't see each other. And one of the things that we don't pay attention is his father, Jacob, when he finds out that Joseph is lost, and he's dead, he's missing, then what he says is, I will not stop mourning or crying for this child until the day I die, right? And so then how does this inform our position also of people who have missing persons in the world, right? How people who are missing people. And when we enter the store, any store where you go and you see this bulletin on the wall where you see missing children, does this story inform your position and what the parents are going through? And what is that? How does that inform our position on people who are missing, and also these people who are going missing in the world as they are migrating and moving from one place to the other? And we can just keep going, down these themes here. But Jesus himself, being a refugee, a political refugee, as a baby, the king is after them, trying to kill them, and they have to cross the border into Egypt. So then, if these characters were to show up today at the border or here in one of the offices that MCC offers immigration services, how will they come into the system? Well, Abraham will come as an immigrant. Rebecca will probably come as a family-based immigrant. There are different ways to apply for the system in the United States today, but one is coming through family-based immigration. The other one is to work. If you have a job here, you can apply. The other one is through this visa lottery, 50,000 visas, and the other one is as an asylum seeker or a refugee. So those are the four main ways that you can enter the United States. But then these individuals here, these characters, will then come, Abraham as an immigrant, Rebecca as a family-based immigrant, Jacob as a refugee, running away at some point, from danger from his brother, a victim of human trafficking. For Joseph, a T visa, Ruth as a family-based immigrant, David as a refugee at some point, running from King Saul at some point too, and Jesus as a refugee and also as a celestial immigrant into the world. And we can just keep going into more characters of the Bible, right? The New Testament, Paul migrating and moving from one place to the other, and the disciples, going to different places. In Christians, then the history of Christianity is one of movement of people and crossing borders and migrating as well. So this is another lens that I think provides me an insight in reading the Bible through the lens of migration as well. But the Bible is also full of stories of migration and hospitality, and God is a God of hospitality. From the beginning, when God when at the beginning of the Bible, we see that there is hospitality in people in antiquity. In the times of Abraham, hospitality was a thing where God could come your way in any shape and form and through the stranger. And this is what we find in Genesis, the beginning, when God actually is coming towards Abraham's tent. And there are at least three men coming, and Abraham just throws himself on the floor and the ground and asks them to come. And then God enters the place and then blesses. Basically, it's a blessing coming in there, right? And Abraham didn't know it was God, but in antiquity, then it was believed that God would come to us and abide within us, and we would not know that God is visiting. And this is what Hebrews 13:2 tells us in some ways, and we can only understand this scripture through that lens, that do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have showed hospitality to angels without knowing. And that is the idea there. Even Jesus sometimes entering into places and they didn't know it was the Son of God, but then as people offer welcome hospitality, then the blessing came. And that we can see through the whole Bible, the encounters of strangers and how that then God was in the midst of that hospitality. So one of the things that I think we're trying to work with in MCC at this point is how can we make hospitality a teaching of the church? It's one of the things that we haven't really done well. And how can we then study hospitality as a Christian teaching, as something that we need to learn about, because God is a God of hospitality. The other thing is that hospitality is a very important piece of who God is, to the point that when we read the Bible and we read in Matthew 25:35, when Jesus is telling talking about the final judgment, and there's this separation of the sheep and the goats, and the judgment comes, and the judgment is not done into what you believed or which political party you were part of or anything else, but it's actually based on hospitality, right? Is based on who offered hospitality, and that's what the rules for the judgment are. That's the basis of the judgment. And for I was hungry and you gave me to eat, and you gave me something to drink, and I was a stranger and you invited me in. So hospitality being at the center of who God is, and the stranger having a place, a very important place in God's mission for the world and for our mission as the church in the world as well. So if hospitality is central to who God is and is very important to God, then the stranger is also central to God. So the stranger should be central to our mission in the world as well, and the mission of the church. And then when we see our current situation in the United States, then we also can my work then is looking at what is happening in the United States and migration now, and trying to figure out how do we then educate the church and see what is happening. A lot of people, when I visit churches, they want to start talking about this from a political perspective, right? So who said this and who said that, and what, you know, what should we do from the political stance? But I think as Christians, we should go first to the Bible. So that's my invitation for you today. But also, I want to invite you to listen a little bit to what our political leaders have said in the past few decades as well. And let's listen to this for a minute and see what has happened here.
It is true our borders are out of control. It is also true that this has been a situation on our borders back through a number of administrations.
I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws.
I've asked for a few minutes of your time to discuss a matter of national importance, the reform of America's immigration system.
An immigration reform bill by a wide bipartisan majority, and it addresses the key issues that need to be addressed.
On the dangerous trek up through Mexico, women or children are the biggest victims by far of our broken system.
Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it.
So one of the things that that I hear a lot of times people asking, you know, so which way should we go, this way or this way, in the political arena as well? And if we just look at the last 40 years, or the last 4 decades at least, and I have also visited Capitol Hill with leaders and pastors that we go and advocate for changes in immigration system. And when I go to the Republican Party, they say, well, if you vote Republican next time, then we'll pass immigration reform. And then we go to the Democrats and they said, if you vote Democrat, then we will pass immigration reform. And you can see that here as well. They are trying to figure out what to do on immigration. And there have been very small changes in the immigration system, but this has been a continuous situation for the last 40 years, and nobody has really tried to do a big reform. Reagan did in 1986 when there was what is called the amnesty for 2.8 million people became legalized through that process, but that was in 1986, and then since then, all has been enforcement in our the changes on the laws, but very little has been done to provide an immigration system that works. Now, the invitation in the Bible, right? A lot of people say, well, Romans 13 says everybody should submit under the law. Now, we have heard all these presidents talk about the immigration system and how broken it is. So then our work as Christians should be so that we reform the immigration system so that everybody can submit under the law, right? People are trying to navigate a broken immigration system. And we've heard that from our presidents. They have said it, we have a broken immigration system. So then as Christians, then our duty, I think, in this should be, well, how can we fix the laws? Because that's one thing that God cares about too, laws that are just, and so that we can then invite people to submit under the law. So that's my invitation too, when we were talking about politics, and this is how do we as the church see this from a perspective that God cares about just laws. We have a broken immigration system. How can we then invite our politicians and legislators to fix the system?
It is true.
So, one of the things that is really being affected, and that is very close to my heart as well, that I've been working in the last few years, is what has been happening at the border. The border in the last 4 decades, if you go back to the times when Reagan was president, and you visited the border, I don't know if any of you have visited the border in Mexico, but at that point, the fence was one of those little small fences with a couple of wires in there that was separating us between Mexico and us here. And then people used to cross and go back and forth, come work over here. People from here used to go over there. And there were communities like Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico, that it was one Nogales. It was divided by the border at some point, but families were on both sides of the community, because at some point it was just this big ranch, then a city, and then it was divided by the border. But so the border has changed quite a bit since in the last 40 years, and now we have built this separation barrier between them and us, and we have created then this fence in some spots where people could cross, and there was a city where people could cross easily and then get lost in general population in the other side. So we have built this fence and made it harder for people to do that, and push people into parts of into deserts and cross through rivers that are dangerous. And we have said that then we're going to use these natural resources in some ways as a natural lethal deterrents. And as unfortunately that they have become lethal but not deterrents. And that I think is very important to know, because we are not deterring people in some ways. The people will continue to come, people try to cross because of the situation they're facing over there, but also our pool for people to come and work over here. Our factories right now, actually here in Goshen, Indiana, they're offering money to come and work in the factories, and they're trying to hire people. I think in the last few months we had up to shortages of about 2,000 people in the factories here, and people were moving from Chicago and other places to come and work in here as well. So so there's a lot of need for labor visas and for work visas in the United States, but we haven't dealt with that in the United States for a long time. The last time that we revisited our immigration system it was in 1965. And since then, the quotas have not really changed very much on any of these things of, the visas for families, visas for work, and then the quota for asylum seekers or for refugees is set by the president, and it has gone down from 198,000 to down to 17,000, 14,000 during the Trump administration, and now trying to be picked up again for 65,000. So it all has fluctuated in that way, but we really haven't done anything inside the immigration system to actually make it work in a better way as well. So then what we find is just this deterrent, building walls, and is building a wall a solution, or is it just trying not to see it, trying not to deal with the actual root causes of the issue? What we have found also in this area is that a lot of people then are dying. This is a little bit more what now the new fence or the new wall looks like along the Mexico-US. At this point, the Obama administration built the part, and that was coming from the fence that I showed you the first picture. Then this is the fence that is being built now, or the wall that is being now. And then during the Trump administration, the barbed wire, the razor wire came as well. So then every time we are putting a little bit more of a more stronger voice saying, we don't want you here, and this is our way to deal with the immigration system in a way. This is another picture here. If you look at the picture on the right, I took this picture because the little fence is what the border used to look like before, and the fence on the right is what it looks like now. One thing that changed this as well is that in 1994 we signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And then NAFTA, then we decided that things will be able to cross back and forth, produce and all kinds of electronics, things coming from Mexico, and will be crossed fine within Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So our economies were borderless. The things that didn't make it through were people, will be controlled, and drugs. So then drugs and people have become illegal. In that sense of crossing borders, and those are the ones that are causing most issues. and then the rest of things then can cross. So a banana or a TV can cross faster than a human being through the border in some ways. So there is, that's kind of how we're dealing with the economic part of this. But one of the things that happened then is that NAFTA, when NAFTA was signed, economists were saying, well, this will drive a lot of people because we were taking over the economy in Mexico for corn, and they knew that, and they said this will drive a lot of people and push them for migration. But then one of the things that then we said here is, okay, let's start building this wall. So that's what happened in 1994 is when we start thinking about building a wall. But then in 1994 also what we start seeing is that a few years after that, we start seeing an increase in migrant deaths along the border. And when you see the blue dots is where you see more of the migrant deaths that are occurring at the border as well, which is one of the worries too, that this is also becoming a little bit of a disaster in the border, or something that we need to pay attention to. Let me just do this quickly, and then we can open for some questions, and I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions or comments on this, but let me show you something that has been happening at the border and that I think we should pay attention to. This is a map of Arizona, and you see the red dots. The red dots is where the remains of migrants have been found along the desert in that area, in the Sonoran Desert. The numbers in the left here, on the left-hand corner, is the year, and then is the number of recoveries of migrant remains that have been recovered, and where they have been recovered. This is 1992, before NAFTA was signed. And then this is 1996, a couple years after NAFTA was signed. But then we start seeing an increase a few years later when people started losing their lands, and we started taking over some of the economics in Mexico. Then 1999, and I'm gonna keep clicking without any commentary on this, and you can see what happens. And this is this year, already this year, from the beginning of the year to now, the remains of 13 migrants have been found already at the border. And we can see that in 2022, actually 2020 and 2020, 2020 and 2021 have been probably the highest years when more migrants have been found in the desert. And this is on the US side of the desert. This is in some ways also people being pushed into these areas of the desert where there's no water. Some of them are freezing, the heat. So when I have visited the border with different groups, one of the things that we do is visit the graves of at the border. There's a cemetery probably about a block from the border wall on the US side in Douglas, Arizona. And we go there at the cemetery and we find these tombstones that said unidentified female or identified or unknown. And one has to wonder what who is there, and also if the family is waiting somewhere. If you remember, when I mentioned the story of Joseph and his father, who says, I will not forget, I will not stop crying for this child until the day I die. Just the thousands of people who are still waiting to hear about their loved one, right? It's missing, and the body or the ashes are at the medical examiner's office in Tucson, Arizona, or one of the cemeteries or one of these places along the border. How long will it take for you to forget if your son or daughter or your mother goes missing? How long will it take for you to forget or to stop looking for them? And these people, they don't forget. They stop thinking about it. They start waiting for that kiss and for that hug to come back. And so then we also have to think about this as people created in the image of God. And if we truly believe in the scriptures that said everybody's created in the image of God, then we should also then think about this tragedy happening at the border and how we can then speak about it and talk about it as well, and then invite our politicians to change the system so that we can be a little more just in some ways in our immigration system. I am going to stop here and then invite you to response and conversation and questions if you have any. I know I've said a lot and maybe I haven't covered things that you were hoping for me to talk about, but please let me know. And one of the things that we do with MCC, and so maybe I'll just stop there, is we do, if you're interested in learning more about this, doing learning tours to the border, we take groups from churches that are interested and come to us to the border as well, so that you can talk about that. We also do advocacy with our politicians from a Christian perspective so that we can inform our politicians about our position on these issues as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have roughly 5 minutes for questions. So if anyone has a quick question, please feel free to ask that. You can also enter a question in the chat if you'd like to do it that way.
I have a question. My name's John, and I'm wondering how the immigrants that are waiting at the borders and floundering in the system feel about the open arms of thousands of Afghan refugees coming here to resettle just because they helped people fight or helped us in the war versus the dilemma they experience.
Yeah, I actually haven't asked that question to people waiting at the border. There have been, in the last few years, the last couple of years, especially when I have visited the border, because we closed the border, there's Title 47 we're using. There's a health measure that when there's a pandemic like we have now, then we're allowed to cross the border, right? So people have not been asylum seekers or refugees, especially adults, haven't been able to cross the border. Those with children have been allowed to come in some way, but yes, I don't know what the response will be from an asylum seeker seeking refuge here, but I would say they probably will feel like it's unfair for them to be waiting. Even some of them have been waiting 2 years, in a tent city somewhere. We have these refugee camps on the other side of the border, waiting for people there up to 2 years sometimes. And yes, we have opened the door for other people coming from other parts of the world. And so I really don't have an answer for you, John, but I would say that, yes, it seems very unfair for some people to wait for a couple of years, fleeing from the same kind of situation some ways, and not being able to be allowed to get into the United States.
I mean, the disaster in Afghanistan now is a disaster which we helped cause after spending 20 years there killing people and trying to convince people to work with us. And then we leave them behind in a sudden withdrawal that was worse than Vietnam. And it just, I mean, it looks like the disaster at the border, only worse. It just looks to me like the government is bungling the whole thing while people will die. And they died in the war, and now they're dying again by starvation all over Afghanistan in ways they never have before. And this, I think, speaks to us as a peace church. I was just flabbergasted by the amount of bodies in the desert, and as it kept piling up. I mean, it's an emotional thing.
And I think it's important for us to remember that we are part of the migration from Central America and a lot of other places as well, because our actions overseas have caused a lot of things, a lot of policies. So yeah, it's important for us to remember that when we make decisions about the border. One thing our church is doing is trying to help undocumented people who've come into the community. And we've had very generous contributors who have helped with that. And we've been doing it for 3 years now and working with some other churches as well. But people, undocumented people are in our community, in our area, and continue to come in. And of course, to Church World Service, we get refugees as well and other things. But it's important for us to keep that in mind, that we are part of the problem and we are part of the solution, as Mr. Padilla said.
Damon, do you have anything else to add about how individuals on this call and within the congregation can support the work of the immigration support group?
You can volunteer. I mean, you can join the committee and help us in making some decisions. There have been probably about 4 or 5, 6 of us meet by Zoom. We do have sort of semi-regular meetings, at least every other month, and we talk about issues and families that we know. We've had a lot of contributions from people, and but we're always learning and wanting to know if you know some families who may need support, who are undocumented. We are willing to help with them as well, because we do have funds. We are seeking to work with legal fees and other things that people are going through. We have a few families who we're working with for the past few years, but during the pandemic, we lost a lot of contact with people, and people have moved on. So yeah, if you do hear some undocumented families and people need help, that would be helpful also. And you can contact myself or Nancy Sheaf, Sandy Flanagan, and other people on our committee, Pat Williams. And if you're interested, just let us know. And we can connect you in on our next meeting on the 22nd, a Zoom meeting 22nd, George Washington's birthday, who is an immigrant here as well. At least to his parents anyway.
Hey, thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn back to our speaker this morning. Saulo, could you send us out with some words for us to think about as we go from this place? And once again, thank you for taking the time to share about your story and to share some information with this group. For those of you who may want to pass this on, this has been recorded and will be available on our Adult Sunday School section of our YouTube page. But at this time, I'd like to turn it back to you for some parting words.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for the invitation. I see there is a question in there about asylum seekers and the process. Recently, Mennonite Central Committee has a new position working. It's called Newcomers Connections Coordinator, and this person will be working directly with congregations on working on the sponsoring of asylum seekers and refugees as well. At this point, there is a new program of private sponsorship offered by the government, especially for refugees from Afghanistan. So then we're working on that, but also walking along with asylum seekers. So so that's an invitation. I can put you in contact with that person. If you're interested, you have my email, and I can send you information about that as well in the future, next week or so. The invitation today is for welcome, right? And I invite you to, and thank you for the work you're doing already on welcoming immigrants, whoever they are, asylum seekers, refugees, undocumented immigrants. Also, do not forget to welcome each other. Sometimes it's so easy to welcome the stranger, and then to welcome each other is hard too. So blessings to you as you continue doing this work, and thank you once again. Be in touch. You have my email information. You have my contact information. So thank you for the work, and blessings to you from Mennonite Central Committee.
Thank you very much, and blessings to you too. Farewell, everyone. Have a wonderful morning. Thanks.